What happens when a humble janitor uncovers the secrets of a billionaire CEO? Tonight, we reveal how David Johnson turned years of humiliation into a carefully planned revenge that shook Manhattan's corporate world. This story proves never underestimate the invisible. Victoria Sterling never liked surprises, especially not uninvited ones at her office. But that Tuesday night, as she stepped into the dimly lit room of Sterling Holdings, a feeling of unease settled in her chest. The polished marble floor reflected the faint glow of the city lights outside, and the hum of the air conditioning was the only sound she expected to hear. Yet the scene before her froze her in place. There, in the seat she herself occupied every day, sat David Johnson, the night janitor. His hands moved deliberately over her personal computer keyboard, his focus absolute. Victoria's eyes narrowed, a mix of disbelief and fury washing over her. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the quiet. Her Hermes' bag fell to the floor, forgotten in her shock. The clock read 11:30 p.m., and she had returned only to retrieve some documents she had left behind. She never imagined finding someone rummaging through her private files. Someone she had always deemed invisible. David looked up slowly, his calm gaze unnerving in its steadiness. There was no hint of panic, no trembling, no apology. At 34, he had spent 3 years navigating these halls unnoticed, underestimated at every turn, and yet in that moment, there was something in his expression that made Victoria instinctively step back. "Good evening, Miss Sterling," he said, his voice measured, almost polite. He paused, saving what he had been typing, his movements slow and deliberate, almost theatrical. "I was just finishing some calculations. Victoria's voice rose, anger spiking uncontrollably. She strode toward the desk, her heels clicking against the marble. "You're fired. I'm calling security right now." But David didn't flinch. Instead, he turned the monitor toward her, revealing a spreadsheet filled with numbers that made her stomach drop. Offshore accounts, bank transfers, hidden transactions, everything she believed buried. Every fraudulent maneuver meticulously documented. His lips curved into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile. "Interesting how numbers don't lie, huh? Especially when you know where to look," he murmured. Victoria felt the floor shift beneath her. These files were on a secure server, accessible only through her personal password. How could a janitor possibly access them? A flashback hit her, unbidden. 3 months ago, during a high-stakes board meeting, she had humiliated David in front of executives. He had been quietly cleaning the room when she interrupted, her words sharp and cutting. "Can you stop there and clean properly this time? It seems you can't even learn the simplest tasks." Laughter had echoed across the room, awkward and condescending. While David lowered his head and resumed his work in silence, at the time she hadn't noticed how keenly he observed everything, every password typed, every whispered conversation, every document left open. Now, standing in her office, David straightened, adjusting his cleaning uniform as if it were the attire of a king reclaiming his throne. "You've always considered me invisible," he said calmly. "I've discovered that being invisible has its advantages." With deliberate slowness, he withdrew a flash drive from his pocket. 3 years of observation, listening, recording, noting every illegal maneuver, every lie, every shortcut Victoria had used to build her empire on deceit. For a moment, Victoria's pride waged war against her rising panic. "You don't have the guts to," she began. But he interrupted her silent challenge with a quiet confidence that froze her blood. David's eyes met hers, unwavering. The possibilities of what he could do with this information hung heavy in the air. FBI media, public exposure, the power he wielded with this tiny device was incomprehensible to her. Outside, the city's skyscrapers glittered, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the 45th floor. Victoria, accustomed to controlling every aspect of her world, realized for the first time that she was entirely at the mercy of someone she had considered disposable. David paused at the doorway, giving her one last look over his shoulder. "Oh, and Miss Sterling," he said softly, "tomorrow I'll be back to my normal cleaning schedule. There's still plenty of dirt to clean around here." He left her standing there, heart racing, mind spinning. The question that hammered through her thoughts was simple and terrifying. If a janitor had unearthed her deepest secrets, what else might come out of the shadows? Victoria Sterling didn't sleep that night. Every time her eyes closed, she saw the calm, controlled smile of David Johnson. The flash drive dangling between his fingers like a sword over her head. By dawn, she was on the phone with Marcus Wellington, her head of corporate security, her voice cold and commanding. Every detail of David's life had to be scrutinized. Every connection, every past job, every person he had ever known. She was determined to eliminate the threat before it could unravel the empire she had spent decades building. But as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the office windows, one fact became painfully clear. Victoria Sterling had underestimated David Johnson. An underestimation, she was about to learn, could be far more dangerous than any direct confrontation. Victoria Sterling woke up the next morning with a burning urgency that left no room for hesitation. The memory of David Johnson in her office, calm and unshakable, replayed endlessly in her mind. Every detail, the slow, deliberate movements, the flash drive dangling between his fingers, the quiet certainty in his voice was an insult she couldn't ignore. She picked up her phone and dialed Marcus Wellington, her head of corporate security and former FBI investigator. "Marcus," she snapped, her voice sharp, "I want a full investigation on David Johnson. Every detail. Where he lives, who he associates with, what cars he drives, his family, his finances, everything. Treat this like war." Marcus scribbled notes quickly, aware that any misstep could escalate the already dangerous situation. "Red-level security threat, ma'am?" he asked cautiously. "Treat it like war," Victoria repeated, cutting him off. "This man cannot work anywhere in Manhattan after I'm done with him. I want him destroyed." By mid-morning, Victoria was at Sterling Holdings, summoning the Human Resources Director, Rachel, to her office. Rachel entered nervously, clutching a thick folder, her hands trembling slightly. Victoria's tone was merciless. "I don't care what your records say. I want David Johnson out today. Make something of insubordination, theft, inappropriate behavior, anything. Just get it done." Rachel's face paled. "Miss Sterling, without legal justification, he could sue for discriminatory dismissal," she warned. Victoria leaned forward, eyes sharp as knives. "I built this company from the ground up. I decide who stays and who goes. Find a way, or I'll find someone more competent for your position." Rachel swallowed hard and left, shaken, knowing that the rules she had relied on her entire career no longer applied. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, David Johnson began his day as usual, pushing his cleaning cart down the corridors. Everything seemed ordinary, almost mundane. Yet, for anyone paying close attention, subtle differences were visible. His uniform pocket concealed a microcamera. His cleaning supplies hid a tiny digital recorder, and his eyes scanned the room with quiet precision. He noted who came and went, the small whispers of executives, the confidential documents left open on desks. Every gesture, every conversation, every password typed in plain sight was a piece of the puzzle he had been assembling for years. David's backstory gave context to this quiet vigilance. Raised by his grandmother, who worked tirelessly cleaning houses for wealthy families in Connecticut, he learned early that survival required both observation and discretion. "People like us only survive if we know when to speak and when to listen," she often told him. "And listening is always more valuable." At 18, David had earned a scholarship to study accounting at the University of Connecticut. But when his grandmother fell ill, he had to drop out in his 3rd year, working 3 jobs to pay for her treatment. The experience taught him patience, discipline, and the value of collecting information without drawing attention. David's meticulous nature extended beyond mere observation. Within 2 years at Sterling Holdings, he had acquired an understanding of the company's finances that rivaled, and in some ways exceeded, that of the executives who flaunted their power over him. He could identify irregularities in contracts, suspicious transfers, and hidden accounts that others missed because they were blinded by greed or arrogance. Every meeting he attended silently while cleaning, every spreadsheet left open, every document left unattended contributed to his growing mental archive of evidence. Victoria. on the other hand, remained blinded by her own arrogance. She assumed firing David would resolve the threat, that removing him from the premises would erase the danger he represented. She didn't consider that his knowledge, accumulated over years of patient observation, could not be undone simply by termination. Her fury was rooted in control, in dominance, not in understanding the subtle, patient danger that David represented. She failed to see that by attempting to suppress him, she might be fueling the very fire she wished to extinguish. As David moved through the offices, interacting politely with security guards and other employees, his calm demeanor belied the storm he was orchestrating in silence. He appeared to clean, to push his cart, to scrub and polish, yet every action had purpose. Microphones, cameras, mental notes. He was gathering evidence in real time, reinforcing what he had already collected over 3 years. The arrogance of those above him, the CEO who considered herself untouchable, the executives who assumed their actions went unnoticed, all of it was being quietly cataloged and preserved by the end of the morning. Victoria's attempts to manipulate human resources and mobilize security had begun, but she remained unaware of the scale of the threat she faced. David Johnson, the man she dismissed as invisible, had already converted humiliation into a strategic advantage, laying the groundwork for a plan that would move far beyond the walls of Sterling Holdings. His knowledge, his patience, and his meticulous planning had created a situation Victoria could neither control nor anticipate. The question lingered in the air. Invisible, but undeniable, would firing David Johnson stop the threat, or had it only strengthened it? In her arrogance, Victoria assumed victory was within reach, unaware that her own actions were feeding the strategy of a man whose patience, intelligence, and quiet determination had turned invisibility into power. As David continued his work, each step deliberate, each note taken, each secret observed, the silent countdown to the moment of exposure had already begun, and the first moves of a meticulous plan were unfolding before her eyes. David Johnson entered the small, inconspicuous cafe in downtown Manhattan with the calm confidence of someone who had long learned the value of patience. He slid into a corner booth where James Mitchell, a 52-year-old former FBI investigator, was already seated, stirring his coffee with deliberate care. James had a reputation that preceded him, a specialist in corporate financial crimes, a man who had brought down powerful executives and left Wall Street shaking. David placed a small flash drive on the table, his fingers brushing it lightly as if it were a simple object, nothing more. 3 years, he said quietly, of evidence. James's eyes widened slightly, but he remained composed, knowing the weight of what lay before him. He nodded for David to continue. Inside the flash drive were emails, recordings of confidential meetings, financial statements, evidence of offshore accounts, and the meticulous notes David had maintained for years. It was a map of deception, a digital trail of every illegal maneuver Sterling Holdings had executed under Victoria Sterling's leadership. James scrolled through the folders carefully, his face betraying a mixture of astonishment and professional respect. Money laundering, rigged contracts, tax evasion, manipulation of public bids, everything was documented with a precision that rivaled federal auditors. "This is a gold mine," James said softly, his voice carrying the weight of understanding. David leaned back in his chair, his calm expression belying the storm that his evidence would soon unleash. "Victoria Sterling isn't just a CEO," he said, his voice steady. "She's the mastermind behind a scheme siphoning more than $200 million from public contracts over the last 5 years, and she's been clever until now." James looked up, impressed not only by the scale of the fraud, but by the strategy behind David's actions. "How did you gather all of this without anyone noticing?" James asked. David smiled faintly. "The arrogance of people like her is their weakness. They think employees like me are invisible. They leave emails open, documents on desks, and discuss their illegal actions without hesitation." The two men discussed the logistics carefully, mapping out a plan that would distribute the evidence to multiple channels. The FBI would receive details of money laundering and federal fraud. The IRS would get tax evasion documents. The SEC would examine stock manipulation. And the press would be informed to ensure public exposure. David explained that the timing was crucial. Victoria Sterling believed that firing him had ended the threat. In reality, it had freed him to act without restrictions. She had inadvertently strengthened his position, giving him the clarity and independence to move swiftly. As they strategized, David emphasized the deeper motivation behind his actions. This was not merely revenge. It was justice for the countless victims of Victoria Sterling's schemes. Retirees who lost their pensions, employees laid off to conceal embezzlement, contractors exploited for profit, all of them were part of the silent chorus driving his determination. "It's personal now," David said. "But it's bigger than that. It's about fairness. About proving that arrogance and prejudice can be countered with patience, intelligence, and evidence." James nodded. Recognizing a rare combination, someone who had endured humiliation yet retained the discipline to act, methodically and without emotion until the moment was right. Every detail was examined: the presentation of documents, the verification of files, and the precise order in which evidence would be submitted. David knew the power of timing and optics. He understood that exposure had to be undeniable, legally defensible, and complete. James used 2 chaotic whistleblowers and incomplete evidence, found himself impressed by David's foresight. Nothing was left to chance. 3 years of preparation culminated in a plan that required flawless execution. And David's calm demeanor reassured James that the man he was working with was fully capable. The cafe hummed around them. Oblivious to the gravity of the conversation taking place in the corner booth, patrons sipped coffee, exchanged quiet chatter, scrolled through their phones, entirely unaware that a storm capable of toppling a Manhattan empire was quietly taking shape within the walls. David's gaze drifted to the window, watching the city move with its usual relentless energy. He reflected briefly on the irony. Those who underestimated him assumed control, while he, once invisible, now held the power to redefine their reality. James leaned back, folding his hands on the table. "Once we set this in motion, there's no turning back," he said. David met his gaze calmly. "I know. That's why the timing must be precise. 48 hours. That's all we need. Enough for her to feel secure, enough for us to organize phase 2. By then, the first shockwaves will begin." The weight of the statement hung in the air, charged with anticipation. David's meticulous planning, patience, and strategic patience had reached the threshold of action in those moments. Both men understood the scale of what they were about to unleash. David had transformed years of invisible labor and quiet observation into a weapon of undeniable power. Victoria Sterling, confident in her own victory, remained completely unaware that the firing she celebrated had only accelerated the downfall she could not yet perceive. The countdown had begun, and in 48 hours, the carefully orchestrated revelations would expose a world of corruption, arrogance, and greed, leaving no one untouched. David checked his watch one last time, his fingers brushing the flash drive as if drawing energy from it. The calm patience of years had led to this moment. Outside the cafe, the city moved on, indifferent, while inside, the first moves of a meticulous and devastating plan quietly settled into place. In 48 hours, the empire built on greed would begin to crumble, and the man who had been underestimated for so long would finally step into the light. The morning air in Manhattan was crisp, carrying with it a sense of chaos that would define the day. At Sterling Holdings, the calm of the previous nights had been shattered. FBI agents moved swiftly through the corridors, executing search and seizure warrants with precision, collecting computers, financial records, and communication logs dating back 5 years. IRS auditors meticulously examined tax documents, while SEC investigators scrutinized stock transfers and internal reports. Victoria Sterling, once untouchable in her corner office, was now confronted with the very institution she had believed she could manipulate. Panic replaced arrogance as she realized that her empire, built on deception, was unraveling. Phones rang incessantly, emails flooded in, and staff moved nervously. Caught between disbelief and fear, across the city, media outlets had already begun reporting on the unfolding scandal. The New York Times website displayed a headline that sent shockwaves through Manhattan's corporate elite. Cleaner reveals $1 million scheme, $200 million. Fraud exposed at Sterling Holdings. Accompanying the article was a photograph of David Johnson, the unassuming janitor, juxtaposed against images of Victoria Sterling at a gala, her expression confident and dismissive. The story detailed how David had systematically collected evidence over 3 years, documenting offshore accounts, fraudulent transfers, rigged contracts, and manipulations of public bids. Social media erupted as the video of Victoria publicly humiliating him months earlier resurfaced. Casting her arrogance and prejudice in stark relief, Victoria's world collapsed with each passing minute. Her company's stock plummeted, contracts were canceled, and investors demanded immediate explanations. Calls from lawyers, journalists, and board members created a relentless storm she could not escape. She tried to assert control, to deny the allegations, but the weight of evidence was undeniable. Every email, every recorded conversation, every financial anomaly meticulously collected by David undermined her position. She realized with a sinking horror that her own actions firing David, attempting to destroy him professionally, had only played into his hands, providing the freedom and legitimacy he needed to act without conflict of interest. In contrast, David Johnson moved through the day with quiet dignity. Interviews with journalists revealed a man composed, respectful, and resolute. When asked about his motivation, he spoke calmly. This was never about revenge. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that other workers are not humiliated or exploited as I was. His measured tone and unwavering composure only amplified the public's admiration, creating a stark contrast with Victoria's visible panic. While she scrambled, humiliated and desperate, David's patience, intelligence, and moral clarity became an example for countless observers. Victoria was formally removed from her position by the board, her personal assets frozen, and her reputation irreparably damaged. Legal authorities pursued charges of fraud, tax evasion, and corruption, ensuring that she would never hold power again in the corporate world she had once dominated. Her once lavish penthouse became a symbol of loss. The furniture auctioned off to cover debts, while her name became a cautionary tale in the press. Every attempt to control the narrative failed. The very arrogance and disdain she had wielded against employees like David had facilitated her own downfall. 6 months later, contrast in their lives could not have been starker. David Johnson, now a respected national consultant specializing in corporate financial crimes, sat in a glass-walled office in downtown Manhattan. His expertise, forged through years of patient observation and rigorous collection of evidence, was now employed to safeguard institutions, uncover corruption, and protect whistleblowers across the country. He wore his first executive suit, a tangible symbol of the recognition and respect he had earned through intelligence, integrity, and perseverance. His work inspired others to stand against injustice, demonstrating that skill and patience could overturn even the most entrenched power structures. Victoria Sterling, on the other hand, found herself working as a night cleaner, navigating the very world she had once looked down upon. The lessons of humility, patience, and dignity were imposed on her in stark contrast to the life she had once commanded. Every corridor she polished and every trash bag she carried reminded her that true influence is earned, not demanded, and that arrogance and prejudice can have consequences far greater than a lost fortune. The public humiliation she endured served as a mirror to the very behavior she had once exhibited toward those she deemed invisible. David's impact extended beyond personal vindication. His story inspired a movement among workers who had been marginalized or dismissed, proving that intelligence, patience, and moral courage could dismantle corruption from the inside. Organizations across industries began to adopt stronger protections for whistleblowers, ensuring that the dignity of all employees would be respected and that the arrogance of the powerful could no longer go unchecked. In a world where wealth and influence often obscure integrity, David Johnson emerged as a figure of moral and professional triumph. His strategy, patience, and meticulous execution had transformed personal humiliation into systemic justice. Victoria Sterling's fall was complete, not because of brute force or vengeance, but because she underestimated the quiet power of observation, preparation, and ethical resolve. David Johnson showed the world that patience, intelligence, and integrity can dismantle even the most powerful empires.